Hi, everybody. This is Bevan Bucheister with the National Governors Association. I'm a senior policy analyst with the Center for Best Practices. And I want to welcome you to our webinar on increasing economic resiliency of the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation sectors. I want to welcome our audience, first of all, and let you know that our audience comprises NGA's Outdoor Recreation and Outdoor Recreation Learning Network and our Workforce Development and Economic Development Networks. And then the Economic Development Administration's headquarters staff that is working with us on this research grant, and their regional offices. And also I would like to welcome the grantees who received travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation grants. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the background of this project. NGA is partnering with Oregon State University's Center for Outdoor Recreation Economy on this research to research the effectiveness of the outdoor recreation, or travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation grants that EDA provided to states and local governments. A little background on the funding here. The EDA invested $750 million in American Rescue Plan funding to help the travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation sectors recover, and also to make it more equitable, competitive, and resilient. So they've funded 185 projects throughout the United States.
The front door?
And if you could just turn off your mute yourselves, that would help. So NGA is partnering with OSU on this 2-year project to assess the effectiveness of the grants and to promote best practices. Our goals are to highlight innovative projects that can be replicated, and also projects that expand the travel and tourism and outdoor recreation economy, and that provide workforce programs to train workers so they're higher skilled and they earn higher wages, and also projects that create equitable opportunities and diversify the economies to make them resilient to economic shocks and climate change, and especially the economic shocks that we saw around COVID-19. The details, 2-year study, we are developing the metrics to gauge the effectiveness of the investments in travel, tourism, and outdoor recreation, because this is the first time that EDA has invested in outdoor recreation specifically. So we are looking for your help in figuring out what we need to measure. So we're gathering data, and we're also developing case studies on projects that are innovative and replicable. We're holding 4 webinars. So this is the first in the series of 4 webinars. The next will be in June, September, and December of 2023. So you'll be invited to them as well. And then we're publishing our final report in 2024. I want to introduce you to the NGA and the project team. NGA, for those who haven't interacted with us, we're a bipartisan organization. We represent all of the nation's governors of the 50 states and the territories and the commonwealths. And the best practices, the Center for Best Practices, is the side of NGA that works on policy consulting for the states. And we develop solutions for governors to their most pressing policy challenges. Our networks that are working on this project are environment and outdoor recreation networks, and our workforce development and economic policy networks. Our partners, Oregon State University, developed the Center for Outdoor Recreation to research the workforce needs and training needs of the outdoor recreation sector. And they work with industry and states and leadership to provide that kind of training. At NGA, our leaders of this project here are Jessica Rackley, the Program Director for Environment and Energy, Rachel Stevens Parker, Program Director for Workforce Development and Economic Policy. And then there's myself, I'm a Senior Policy Analyst for the Environment Division, and Sally Rude, Senior Policy Analyst for the Workforce Development and Economic Policy Division. Just checking for who I can mute here. Looks like everybody is muted. Okay. And then at OSU, we have Lee Davis. He's Executive Director for the Center for Outdoor Recreation Economy, and Randy Rosenberger, who is a professor in the College of Forestry, and he's our data expert. So let me advance the slide. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our three speakers that are going to be presenting today. We have Cameron Bennett and Mike Cassidy, both from the city of Pawtucket, Rhode Island. Cameron's the Assistant Director of the Department of Planning and Redevelopment, and Mike is their planning consultant, and he was the former planning director. So they're going to tell us all about their project. And then we're inviting Jennifer Pillay, who's the division administrator in Montana's Department of Commerce, to tell us about their project. And we want to hear about, we asked them to talk about what was the need for their project, and how they are going about implementing their project, and what is innovative and replicable about their project. So without further ado, let me hand it over to Cameron and Mike.
Thank you so much, Bevan. And I speak for both of us when we are both very excited to be able to talk about this project and what's going on in Pawtucket. So this project is the construction of a bikeway through the city, which is part of the Blackstone River Bikeway. So for context, the Blackstone River Bikeway is a 49-mile bikeway, part of the Bi-State National Park Service National Heritage Trail, celebrating the Industrial Revolution throughout Northeast Rhode Island and South Central Massachusetts. The bikeway extends from Providence in Rhode Island all the way to Worcester in Mass. The bikeway also connects to Rhode Island's East Bay Trail, which extends to Bristol in southern Rhode Island. So this particular project, the stretch of bikeway through Pawtucket, is one of the last segments of the bikeway in Rhode Island to be completed. So the EDA grant funds the portion that extends approximately a half mile through the heart of Pawtucket along the river. While on that subject, we have to thank EDA so much. They have provided $5.8 million in funding, and this project would not have come to fruition without their incredible support. So as you can see on the map on the screen, there are multiple stretches of the bikeway project through the city. The focus of the current project is the section stretching from the new Tidewater Soccer Stadium, which we will discuss in a little bit, which is currently under construction, to the Blackstone River Valley National Historic Park site, Slater Mill, which is the segment in red. The segment in orange is a connection to our new transit hub, and the section in yellow on the left-hand side of the screen is one of the upcoming projects for the city scheduled for 2026, which will finish the stretch of bikeway north of City Hall into our neighboring city, Central Falls. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So Pawtucket is a multicultural minority-majority community. We have a population that is approximately 48% white, 25% Hispanic or Latino, 17% Black or African American, and 10% made up of other races. We also have high levels of low and middle income residents. So in that context, our main goals in developing this project have been: one, creating outdoor recreation and increasing green space for our residents. We wanted an economic rebound after COVID-19 and the closure of McCoy Stadium, which was the location of our former minor league baseball team. We've wanted to expand cultural tourism in Pawtucket, which is at the mouth of the Blackstone River Valley, one of the most beautiful, historically significant places in Rhode Island. Not that we're biased or anything, but we also wanted to eliminate bicycle network gaps in the larger bikeway. Bicycle networks and connected bike paths have been demonstrated in other communities to have greater impact and more ridership. And finally, we want to establish linkages to our transit hub with connections to the airport, the city of Providence and Boston in Massachusetts along commuter rail and to the rest of Rhode Island from the Transit Center bus hub. Can we go to the next slide? So Mike?
Okay, so the origin of the Blackstone Valley Bikeway, the goal of the development of the bikeway was to connect the cultural, economic, tourism, and recreational resources from Providence to Worcester. The bikeway has been funded with multiple resources. Unfortunately, as is not normally the case, the hardest sections to build are the inner cities, so they were the last sections on the list to be built. The plan actually goes back to 1986, and development of the bikeway started in 1990. We've worked very hard to put together funding sources that could allow us to build our sections of the bikeway. We got state transportation money, state recreation money. The city put in multiple funds, and of course, EDA gave us a big boost with the 5.8 million. And the last segment, which is scheduled for 2026, has U.S. Department of Transportation funds that are going to be funding that section of it. So those are the things that we've got an opportunity to put together, is making those partnerships work, making those partnerships viable, and to continue that development. And so that's our focus, is to get all our funding ready to go.
Oh, no, you can go forward.
You can move forward, yep.
Thanks. So as we mentioned earlier, we have a new transit center hub that opened in January of this year, which is at the bottom of the screen. It includes a new stop along the main commuter rail that travels from the T.F. Green International Airport in Warwick to Providence to Boston. So the train has always run through Pawtucket, but it's the first time in decades that we've actually had a stop. The center is also a hub for the RIPTA, Rhode Island Public Transit Authority bus lines, which have connections throughout the rest of Rhode Island. So bike lanes have been constructed through downtown, connecting the bikeway along the river to the transit center. And we should also say, so the transit center is at the heart of our transit-oriented development, or TOD, district, also referred to the Conant Thread District, which is kind of a nod to our historic mill past. So this area has already seen tens of millions of dollars in private investment to rehabilitate vacant former mill buildings into hundreds of residential apartments. There are several more major projects in various stages of development, which will bring hundreds more residential units and a number of retail businesses to the area. So for example, one of the existing businesses in the area, Isle Brewers Guild, has one of the biggest beer brewing and canning operations in the New England region. They have a growing retail operation, which now includes an outdoor beer garden and event venue space. Out of the 8,500 brewers in the US, they are in the top 50. So it should be noted that the success of the beer brewing industry has become a symbol of the city's ongoing economic revitalization. Go to the next step.
Okay, the National Historic Park in Blackstone Valley. This park was only established in 2015. So it's been struggled a little bit to get off the ground, first getting the superintendents and their plans together, and then COVID hit. So one of the important components of our bikeway is that we're going to connect the Slater Mill and the Blackstone River Valley National Historic Park to our new Tidewater development, which is a soccer complex and multiple housing commercial development, and to the rest of into Providence through the bikeway, and north south from the northern communities in the city into the city of Pawtucket. So part of our efforts are being directed to try and improve the visitation and visibility of the new national park. The Slater Mill was the original industrial mill in the United States. It was the start of the Industrial Revolution. We refer to ourselves as the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution. And the Slater Mill is the primary component of that. And so this is an important historical site nationally as well as locally.
So just as we have an incredible historic past, we now have some very exciting new development. We've mentioned this Tidewater Soccer Stadium a number of times, but it is a recreational mixed-use development consisting of an 11,000-seat soccer stadium with 39 United Soccer League games planned annually. Tidewater Landing traverses the redevelopment of a 15-acre brownfield site, which will include the USL Championship Soccer Stadium, as well as residential units, structured and surface parking, ground-level retail amenities, an event center, office space, and pedestrian amenities, including a river walk along each side of the river and a pedestrian bridge connecting the two sides. So when this is completed, the stadium will expand our access to our community's underutilized waterfront with a cohesive mix of uses connected on both sides of the river.
So Cameron, I just had a question about the slide or the picture on the bottom of the screen. So is the bike path already existing along the edge of the river there near the stadium and on the other side, or is that going to be new construction?
This is a rendering of what it will look like. Sorry, okay. Yes. So yes, currently it is very much under construction. This is a picture of a year from now.
And then will the bicyclists be able to go over that bridge that we see?
Yes.
Is that part of the plan? Okay. All right. Thanks.
Next slide.
Next slide. All right. So to talk a little bit about the economic side of this bikeway and the greater projects in Pawtucket. So the Pawtucket and our neighboring city, Central Falls, put together an economic development plan through which the city was able to survey 130 local businesses. When asked what types of business assistance was most needed to help their businesses grow and succeed, improving transportation infrastructure was one of the main responses, as well as the need for overall tourism marketing and promotion. So promoting multiple modes of transportation in the designated project areas will attract potential visitors to the Blackstone Valley as a key element in tourism and job creation to those without access to a car. Already, we have seen that the bikeway and associated developments are opening up formerly vacant mill buildings for housing, which will now have access to multiple modes of transportation from our transit hub, regular vehicle parking, and the bikeway. As was mentioned, the bikeway connects to Tidewater Landing, the mixed-use development project, and that will create 1,080 construction jobs and planning for 538 permanent jobs, which will be part of the tourism sector. So the bikeway will also improve access to almost 6,000 jobs within a quarter mile of the bikeway. So in addition to the housing and job creation, the implementation of the remaining segments of the bikeway, it advances equity and public health for residents of Pawtucket and our neighboring communities. It's a huge mitigator for a dense post-industrial city like Pawtucket. So in conclusion, this has been a project that's been decades in the making. Seeing it come to fruition in connection with all the other new projects and developments in Pawtucket is something we're so excited about. We've been so grateful to EDA for helping make this a reality, and it's been such a wonderful opportunity to be able to share our city.
Thanks, Cameron, Mike. I just want to invite the participants here to type any of your questions in the chat. And I wanted to ask you a few questions. Basically, so the bikeway was considered for recreation and also as a commuter option for getting people to work. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Okay. And then Mike, you mentioned something about like the disadvantaged communities. So, and then that was the hardest piece or the last piece to be put together. So can you talk a little bit about that? Was that the bike path is that the portion that's being put together with this EDA funding?
Yes, the portion with the EDA funding and the next segment. The inner city bikeways are always the most difficult because everything's all built out. Our goal was to try and open up the city's riverfront and make it accessible to the people who live around it. Had no access for years because the mills occupied all the property along the river because they used it for power. So getting to snake the bikeway through the city and stay as close to the river or along the riverbank was an important consideration in the development of the plan and the route for the bikeway. And suburban areas are pretty easy. What the bulk of the rest of the Blackstone Bikeway that goes north is primarily former railroad right of way. So they had a pretty easy time of building that out. We've had a more difficult time in getting the route through the city.
All right, and along the same lines of questioning, I've got a question from the chat, and they said, what a great project, thanks for sharing, and wondered if you had any policies in place for anti-gentrification of those areas now that you've put the bike path in, the disadvantaged or near the disadvantaged neighborhoods. Have you thought of that aspect of it?
Well, actually, we've been very fortunate in that in the transit-oriented district and in the mills along the city, they were former industrial uses. Those have been what's been converted to new residential. So we have a very good working relationship with local community development housing organization, and the city has invested a lot of money in developing affordable housing, first-time homeowners opportunities. So we very much were paying attention to the fact that we did not want the new transit center to eliminate the current residents in the residential neighborhoods around it. So our focus has been in putting the new residential units, a number of which are also have affordable units in the existing but were vacant mill buildings, and that's where the bulk of the new market rate housing has been developed.
All right, thanks. Another question asked, will you be partnering with any organizations to provide rentals, or do you think that these new housing opportunities will be used more by the local community?
The Rhode Island has invested about to invest a lot of money in developing affordable housing. And whenever we do there is one site that we cleared right opposite the transit center that's going to be new residential development, and 20% of those units will be affordable. So whenever we participate in a project, we were providing the land for this particular development. We always require that there be affordable housing as part of the housing developments.
Okay, and you expect the new developments to house the local community?
We
not be vacation rentals?
Yes, we are technically a suburb of Boston. There are loads of people who live in Pawtucket and southeastern Mass and northern Rhode Island who commute to Boston or the Boston area every day. The commuter rail line that we just opened up, that commuter rail has been in business for probably 30 years. And for the last 20, it's been commuters from Providence into Boston. So we see a big influx of the renters in the mill buildings are coming from primarily out of state. Pawtucket, for the first time in 4 censuses, had an increase in its population rather than a decrease. So we were pleasantly surprised by that.
Great. Well, this looks like a wonderful project. We can't wait to hear how it goes. Somebody asked, how does the new soccer stadium fit into the overall strategy? And this will be our last question. And I think, Mike, you mentioned that Rhode Island has a pretty strong soccer audience there, right?
Yes, the gentleman who's building the soccer has the franchise for this level of soccer, which is sort of the equivalent to AAA baseball in the scheme of the soccer leagues, the major soccer league. So he has the franchise for Rhode Island and Southeastern Mass. And Rhode Island and Southeastern Mass has the second highest viewership of soccer in the United States. We have a very large minority population. I feel of the 11,000 seat stadium, there are already 4,000 season tickets sold.
Wow, great. And then it fits into, how does it fit into the overall strategy with the bike path and
well,
economic development?
It greatly increases tourism. We're really trying to create or make Pawtucket the place to be. So we'll have plenty of attractions, both in the soccer stadium. We'll have you know, new development in our transit-oriented development district. We'll have restaurants, activities all throughout the city. So it's a combination of tourism, of just increased activity.
Right, and the bike path links all those.
Yes, the soccer development allows, as part of the development, we're constructing right along the river's edge new bikeways, which will connect to the section we're building on both sides of the river. And as you mentioned, that we're going to put a pedestrian bridge connecting the two sides of the river and the two pedestrian bikeway facilities, which will be along the river throughout the new development.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing, and please stay on the line. I forgot to mention at the beginning that after the presentations, we're going to have a brief Q&A, well, after each one like we just did now. And then after that, we're going to stop the recording and the webinar and then invite just our NGA networks to stay on the line with our invited speakers to have a back and forth, a states only kind of back and forth with them. So thank you so much. And let's move on to our next presentation. With Jennifer Pillay, and she's going to tell us about the Montana Resiliency Plan. So Jennifer.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Okay. So I'm not staring at myself while I'm presenting. I'm going to turn off my camera, and then once I'm done and for the Q&A, I'll turn it back on. So as mentioned, I'm Jenny Pillay, and I'm a division administrator at the Montana Department of Commerce. I want to thank you first for your time in attending today, and also thanks to EDA for recognizing the value of this project for funding, and to those who selected it to highlight today. As a division administrator overseeing all of the state's tourism programs at the time that Montana was allocated $2.9 million in ARPA funds from EDA, I was selected as proxy for these funds by the Montana Governor Gianforte. And with this designation, I was given the creative freedom to come up with a proposal for the funding and decided to take things a direction I had been thinking about throughout COVID, but definitely a direction we have not taken before. Next slide, please. So to set the stage, my division developed a business grant during the onset of COVID to address impacts of the COVID shutdowns. It was called a Business Stabilization Grant and was funded by the CARES Act dollars. With that program, we issued $272 million in grants to 12,000 unique businesses, and we're issuing more grants per day than we would issue in an entire year. The purpose of this and the success of the program was to keep businesses open and served as a lifeline, as so many small businesses in our state are tied to the tourism industry and to the influx of people we see each summer and winter, given that tourism is a leading industry here. Serendipitously and unfortunately, on the heels of COVID recovery came the devastating impacts of this past June's flooding, which you probably saw on national television news, of the Yellowstone that closed Yellowstone National Park, washed out major road arteries, and caused communities great hardship, including the town of Gardner, for example, which is a tourism-dependent gateway community into Yellowstone National Park that saw a 90% reduction in revenues during what would have been or should have been their peak season this summer. So once again, in response to that, we set up a grant program quickly to support tourism businesses at threat of closing their doors because of the flooding impacts. In total, we invested $8 million within just a matter of weeks, with $5 million going out to businesses and grants and $3 million into targeted promotions to get visitors back into those areas when it was safe and open. Organizations also set up donation opportunities to help keep the communities afloat. So these two events in short succession were surely eye-opening to us to how vulnerable a leading industry in Montana is to processes that are simply out of our control. Grants alone would not change this course, and I wanted to approach things with these new EDA dollars from a vulnerability perspective, holistically. So for these funds, I proposed resiliency planning as a means to identify our tourism vulnerabilities, such as pandemics, floods, fishing closures, housing shortages, workforce shortages. The list could go on, and then invest in bolstering these communities against those vulnerabilities versus paying out when something were to go wrong. So with that, I set aside roughly half of our allocation, or $1.4 million of the total, for resiliency planning. And then the other half, or $1.5 million, for a grant program that will serve as seed funding for the implementation of the priorities identified in the plans. Next slide, please. As those who have also received these grants, these funds, you know that they're subjective to the state procurement process. So I wanted to bring on a planning firm to assist with this effort, which required an RFP. And through that process, we contracted with a group called Coraggio Group, which is a consulting firm with significant experience in the tourism industry. And we also brought on a consultant named Dax Schiefer, who has great experience and relationships organizing stakeholders throughout the state. And he's been leading and developing quality public engagement processes around these efforts in coordination with myself and Coraggio Group. Together, we're working with the regions. And so, you know, we have 6 designated tourism regions in our state based on geographies. And we're working with each of them and developing these resiliency plans. I didn't get a chance in advance to see the attendees on this list, but I'm going to assume that some of you have actually been here, but many of you are not super familiar with our state. So just to paint the picture here, we have mountains on the west. We have the 2 national parks, Glacier and Yellowstone National Park, on the west. And we have some more populated centers that the majority of those are also on the west side of the state. We're a low population state in general compared to many of you on the line, but the eastern side of the state is more plains, it's more sparsely populated, it's less traveled, and it's largely rural. So that is why I decided to approach this regionally, as each area of the state has different challenges, or they may have similar challenges, but differences in their severity or their priority to address first. So for some areas, the issues are overuse, so around the national parks and things. In other areas, it's lack of access to public lands, or it's workforce, or it's housing. And yet in other areas, it's a matter of tourism asset development and seizing the opportunity to grow. This process, colleagues and I'm sorry, I'm hearing somebody talk. This land and add it to the state park. Mute your.
Happening. There's also just like certain representatives have like projects or agendas that they like endorse strongly and push.
Okay, thank you. So the process of resiliency planning is designed to measure 16 dimensions of destination and organizational resilience to provide greater context into region and organization's challenges and opportunities. And then the results will be used as an input for both region-specific destination resiliency plans and for strategic investment in sustainability or development, depending on the area, to bolster communities and help them respond to unforeseen issues in the future. The outcomes will be 6 regional plans and also 1 state aggregate plan to support the regions, and a commitment to use this document to guide investments moving forward at a geographical scale, prioritized locally to address sustainability or development opportunities. Next slide, please. My goal for this process is for it to be driven locally with strong and diverse participation. I also wanted to have a broad focus on local economies through the lens of tourism, but to see other overlaying and integrated opportunities. So for example, addressing workforce issues will have benefit for industries beyond tourism. As you can see, the process is divided into 3 parts. We are currently in the get clear phase, where we are performing primary research, gathering existing data, and most importantly, involving diverse stakeholders to accumulate their knowledge and insights, while also performing tourism and infrastructure asset assessments. After April, we will move into the Get Focused phase, which is the middle block on your screen. And that's where we will establish committed regional and state level oversight groups. And they will really then put the pen to paper on what we've learned to date and start developing the actual plans. Next slide, please. The plans will be informed by a very large effort of public involvement from the tourism industry, small businesses, economic development organizations, nonprofits, other agencies, tribes, and more. We currently have over 25 participants working with us so far. We have conducted over 40 one-on-one interviews and are finding them a very productive way to get insights. We have also hosted 25 town halls, either in person or virtual, but not both. We found that having them be blended was not the best model. And that's to accommodate preferences for in-person or online, but also to address our extremely large geographies that we're working in, and for the fact that we were hosting many of these during harsh winter road conditions to best increase the potential for people to get involved with our process. And you can see that we're also conducting several forms of surveys as well. We've conducted a resident sentiment survey towards tourism. We've conducted a visitor survey. We will be conducting an internal survey of staff within our organization. And we have also done a stakeholder survey. Next slide, please.
Jen, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that some residents or industry representatives are getting survey fatigue in a post-COVID world. Could you mention that as one of your challenges and how you kind of get over that or address that?
Sure, yeah. And I actually, at the end of my presentation, I do have several lessons learned, but
okay, we'll skip it. We'll wait till then. Let's go to the next slide.
Okay, I'm only have one slide left, so here we go. And so this just gives you a snapshot of the time frame that you're working with, more so that you can see the depth of the effort that we're performing right now. But with this much involvement, it's a multi-year project. We started it last calendar year, and it will hopefully be done with the planning by the end of this calendar year. The situation assessments, so the consolidation of all that primary data collection and all of the stakeholder input and things, we're expecting to see those first assessments come to us in April, May, which is really when I'm going to get my first look at what's occurring out there, what all of the various primary research results are, and see it all consolidated at that point. Then we'll move into that planning phase, as I mentioned, with plans being complete by the end of this calendar year. And that still leaves time for us to lift the second half of the project, which is the grant process to award the remaining funds as seed money for implementation, as I mentioned at the top of the presentation. So we will have our grant process ready when the plans are ready, because we know there will be a process to get those approved as well. And we want to make sure that those funds are expended within the federal deadline. So then, to help make sure the focus on resiliency is carried forward for years, I've also restructured internally. First, I reorganized within my division and dedicated a high-level full-time staff person to this and other planning efforts. The resiliency efforts will guide our investment and our marketing strategies moving forward. And also to leverage federal funds, but then also to provide some funds in perpetuity. I've also committed in front of partners and talked in front of the legislature that I would like to be consolidating our grant funds internally with our state dollars, where we have several different grant programs, and bringing them together into a focused program to continue investing in these plans moving forward. We issue roughly $4 million in various grants per year. So the intention is moving forward that grant programs and awards will need to be tied to these plans to qualify. So as we've embarked on this effort, and given that many communities were impacted by the flooding, We've seen a few other resiliency type exercises pop up in the state and be performed by other organizations, but at a much smaller scale and at a different focus. They're not focusing necessarily on tourism. And so as much as we can, we're sharing insights and knowledge with these groups and then with us. But if this presentation happens to inspire or inform others in a similar process, I think it's always valuable to share lessons learned. So first, I had mentioned that we brought on Coraggio as a consulting group, but we also brought on an individual who has really strong relationships in the state. And I think that has been a really great move to have a non-government liaison attached to this project as well, to really help connect with stakeholders in the process, but also creates a level of trust in a government process. And I think that's been really helpful in getting the engagement that we're seeking. We missed an opportunity because of how quickly this project took off to have a website up prior to the launch of our engagement process. So that was a pretty critical missing piece for people who were just hearing about this for the first time. They weren't sure what resiliency meant, what we were asking. We didn't have a single place to send them for information. We did get that launched now and serves as a place for documents, but also a place for public meetings and engagement opportunities. The survey fatigue that was mentioned a little bit ago, there's a lot of interest in the post-COVID world for information, especially in my world, from the tourism perspective. And since we are a relatively small populated state of about 1 million, you end up going back to a lot of the same people for surveys, whether it's ours or another organizations. So you're going back to the well a lot with the same voices. So we have been seeing a bit of survey fatigue. Also, not surprisingly, it's a challenge for people to expose their vulnerabilities, for communities to expose their vulnerabilities, for our DMOs to expose their vulnerabilities. Sort of like, I equate it sort of like taking a 360 review, where you really have to take a look at yourself and be willing to put that information forward and see it as an opportunity for growth and not as a threat, or that it's actually not a good idea to expose your vulnerabilities. That's the whole point of this process. It's also valuable because of that survey fatigue and other reasons to have built flexibility into our engagement strategies. So we're consistently switching resources, where if we see we aren't reaching our goals on survey responses, but we're having a lot of success with one-on-one interviews, for instance, or getting tribal engagement has been more successful with one-on-one interviews. We're able to make those rapid adjustments in our approach to get the engagement and the information that we're seeking for development, and to make sure that all voices are heard. And then finally,
Jennifer, just a minute. When you went, this is Bevan, when you mentioned one-on-one interviews, are you in person, or are you on telephone, or both?
These are virtual.
Virtual, okay. So, okay, so like it could be a Zoom,
right?
That or phone call. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. There'll continue to be a mix of in-person opportunities and virtual opportunities. We're going to be hosting our large governors conference in April, and we're scheduling in work sessions in connection with that, and then also breakout sessions with the attendees at the conference, for example. So again, and I guess the last thing I would mention is that something like this has not really been done before. So when we went out for RFP, there were not a whole lot of vendors who put in for the contract. And there have been similar exercises done for smaller areas, but to be doing something at this statewide level is something that's pretty new, which has been challenging in terms of helping people understand what it is and not having something tangible to point to, of saying, well, this is what it will look like when it's done, because there isn't anything exactly like that to point to. But at the same time, it's exciting because we don't know what's going to come out of this. And it's a completely organic and authentic process that's locally led. So I'm looking forward to seeing the outcomes of this. Ultimately, and in closing, we hope that these plans will help gain strength as an industry, not in volume, but in sustainability. and chart a unified course for the future, hopefully without any more major disasters, but as a growth and management plan. So perhaps you'll welcome me back and ask me to present in 2026 when it's done, and I'll be able to come back with some success stories across the state of the ways that we've implemented this and made a difference in our state.
Right, great. And that leads to one of my questions as a follow-up, and we have a few others in the chat, but I just wanted to ask you, so how are you gauging success of this project? So what metrics are you using to look at it and say this has been a successful project?
Well, currently in the process, since engagement right now in this first phase is so important, because the plans will only be good as the engagement in the process. We have goals set up per tactic, per geography, so that we know we're getting representative voices in that. Upon completion of the plans, for one, the dissemination and the application of those remaining grant dollars will be huge. And then ultimately from that, the return on investment in areas of development in terms of what tourism gains have occurred and what revenue earnings have occurred because of a result of those investments. And then I would suppose a lack of decline in key factors like revenue in the future if an event, an unforeseen event were to occur down the road. But since each of these plans is really custom developed by a region, the metrics for implementation success will be part of each of those plans.
And so just which body is gathering the data of tourism gains and then revenues from tourism in your state? Is that a state department that's or
yeah, that's something that
that's gathering that information?
Yeah, that's active and ongoing in terms of collections. That's largely administered by Department of Revenue.
Okay. All right, great. Let's see. We've got a question. How does Montana define tourism benefits from out of state spending? Do you look at just out of state spending or in-state spending, or a combination of out of state and in-state? Do you parse it down into those different different categories?
That's a good question. Overall, we look at the bed tax collections. So there's a percentage tax placed on lodging facilities. So overall collections with that is a gauge of success for us. Historically, our focus as an agency has been on the out-of-state visitor. That's been more of our strategic focus because they are largely the higher value in terms of dollars spent while here. But because of the dynamics that are happening right now in our post-COVID world, where we have such a huge number of people coming to the state and mainly going to the western portion of the state, we're shifting our strategies moving forward, which will definitely dovetail with these strategies, but we need to act on them before these resiliency plans are done. And that's take more of a diversification, a dispersal approach to visitation in our state. So we're looking at ways of how we can increase those revenues, those bed tax revenues, and develop tourism assets in our more rural areas by promoting those areas to out-of-state residents. But it's also shifting to be a focus on in-state travelers as well. Thinking that in-state travelers are more familiar and more likely to take trips to the rural parts of the state. So it's more of a moving the money around strategy, and will now be measured on both resident and non-resident.
That's great. Oh, I had a question too about the you are using half of your funding from EDA for planning, and then and half for the implementation program. Is that a full grant for implementation projects, or is there a matching requirement? And how does that work with disadvantaged communities and rural communities that might not have that matching funds? If
okay. Yeah, that's a good question. We haven't set up the grant program yet. We're planning and modeling after an existing annual tourism grant program, which allows nonprofits and tribal governments and counties, but no for-profits at this point, to come in and apply for those grants. And there is a match requirement for that. A vision that I have for this, though, is the amount of millions, $1.5 million is not going to go extremely far in implementing these, and will be, like I said, leveraging state dollars moving forward. But what I really want this to be is by bringing together all of these different voices, that we can also identify other opportunities to leverage funds. So let's say if our state parks, they'll be involved with us on a state level, and we identify the priority projects within one of the regional plans. So, and it's for access. Then how do we bring our grant funds to the table, combine them with something that state parks might have available for funds, where a county might additionally have funds, and a recreation focused nonprofit may have funds, and how can we make those dollars all go further for a project?
All right, that sounds great. Well, that sounds like another aspect we'd love to follow up with you on. We have one more question for you, Jennifer. In the chat box, they say you mentioned 16 dimensions of resilience. Would you be able to share some of these dimensions or share a link to more information?
Sure. I don't have a list of the 16 in front of me, but I can give you an idea of some of the lenses that we're looking through for this planning. So first is like the visitor relationship, visitor management, audience diversification, dispersal strategies, some of the things I just recently mentioned, stakeholders, what are the relationships like, what's the level of collaboration amongst these groups, marketing and communication, diversification of our communication channels, risk tolerance, budget flexibility, crisis readiness, also what are the organizations that are trusted, what are the organizations that have authority, culture and values, diversification of funding sources, like I mentioned before, leveraging different funding sources and things like that. So it's a very broad look at a whole lot of factors that come together, in addition to the ones that I mentioned before of how does workforce availability help this? How does housing availability hinder us? Things like that too.
Great. And so I'm assuming that these things, these measurements will all be in a final report that you are stitching together from all 6 different regions?
Yep. So there will be 6 situation assessments that we will see April, May, and that will be 1 per region. And then there will, in the end, there will be 6 plans, 1 per region, that identify the next steps and the opportunities. And then there will also be 1 state level aggregate plan so that we can best support those strategies.
All right, well, thank you so much. I just want to be respectful of everybody's time and end the recorded part of this webinar and ask our guests from the EDA grantees from the TTOR grants, and then the EDA administration headquarters and regional offices to drop off, since this is the end of the recorded part of the webinar. And I'd like to invite our NGA's Outdoor Recreation Network and our Workforce Development and Economic Development Networks to remain on the line for unrecorded Q&A with our speakers from Montana and from Rhode Island.